So the car I'm sitting in right now is the BMW iX. This is the production version of what was previously called the iNext, which was a much more conceptual car. A lot of people made fun of just how pronounced that kidney grille was. It's been toned down a little bit for this car, but it still has that that same look about it. It's very much a BMW. I mean, what would a BMW be without its kidney grille? So this car is an SUV, or actually it's what BMW calls an SAV, a sports activity vehicle. So it's not quite designed for off-road fun, but it is designed for maybe going down the beach and certainly taking a couple of Labradors out for a walk. Let's find out how it shapes up. Before we do that though, please don't forget to like this video, comment and subscribe to our YouTube channel. So BMW has done a bunch of different things to keep the weight down in this car, because electric SUVs do tend to be pretty heavy. It's got an aluminium space frame, carbon cage, the main body is aluminium, and there's lots of carbon fibre and steel used to keep it fairly stiff. Now there are two versions of this car. The one we have is the iX xDrive 40, and there's a more powerful iX xDrive 50. The xDrive 50 has 385 kilowatts of output with a 190 kilowatt front motor and 230 on the rear, so that's the same as the i4 M50. The xDrive 40 is a rear-wheel drive only with just a rear 250 kilowatt motor. There's also an M60 coming with over 600 horsepower. So this car is not made in Munich like the i4, it's made in Dingolfing, and BMW claims it's entirely produced with hydroelectricity. It's got a roof line a bit like the X6, 22-inch wheels are options. Now they talk about the kidney grille, and they actually say that the material it's made of is self-healing. So that if it actually gets a stone chip or something, it will start to look better after a while. We obviously didn't have this car long enough to test that, and we weren't going to go around and scratch it. The door handles are integrated, but not in the same way as an i4. You have to kind of reach inside, whereas the i4 ones are just kind of flush. There are also a load of option packs you can choose, but I would recommend you look at our written review to get all the details of that. So the obvious BMW comparison for this car is an X5. But actually inside there's more room than an X5 because it is actually slightly bigger. You get some leather options for the seating as well as Alcantara. As the headline act is the panoramic sunroof. Now that has a really cool feature where basically it's greyed out by standard, but you don't actually have to have a blind on it. If you press a button, the panoramic sunroof will actually ungrey or grey using LCD crystals. It's a very, very cool feature. Apparently that's a first for BMW and actually a first for cars as well. These seats are pretty comfortable. There's plenty of room here in this cockpit, as we said. If you go in the back, there's a decent amount of knee room. So we've tested quite a few electric SUVs. They do seem to be the most popular body style. And the amount of room for the third passenger in the middle does tend to vary. Now this one has quite a large middle seat, so it's probably pretty good for 3 people to sit in the back compared to some of the other cars that we've tested. If you don't have that middle passenger, you can take down that middle seat and put some cups in the cup holders. Of course, one of the reasons why you buy an SUV is if you want to put stuff in the back. I talked about a couple of Labradors in my intro, or you could have Whippets, or if you have the Alsatians, obviously they're pretty big dogs, and there's plenty of space for them because the boot is 500 litres as standard, which is not quite as big as some of the biggest SUVs like the Skoda Enyaq, but it's getting there, and you get more than 1700 litres if you drop those seats down. Now the rear seats have a 40-20 split, so you can drop the middle down and put something long and still have 2 passengers in the rear, which is excellent, and a little bit of space under the boot floor. Now, unlike the i4, the iX comes with 2 different battery sizes. This one has a 77 kilowatt hour battery, which gives just 257 miles of range, which is kind of on par with cars like the Volvo XC40. So if you get the 50 version, however, you get 112 kilowatt hour gross and 105 kilowatt hours of usable battery space, which actually gives you up to 380 miles of range, which is absolutely huge. That is actually up there with the extended range version of the Mach-E from Ford. Now that car isn't as fast as this one in 50 form, so that's a pretty good result. So that's a really good choice for long distance travelling in comfort. BMW has also equipped all these cars with 11 kilowatt AC charging, but the DC charging varies. So the 50 has 195 kilowatts, whereas the 40 only has 150 kilowatts. So In 10 minutes you can put 99.2 miles in the 50, whereas 59 miles only in the 40. Charging to 80% on a DC charger, because of the battery size being different, takes 33 minutes on the 40, 35 minutes in the 50. As with other electric BMWs, you also get the BMW charging card with a year subscription, which gives you BP Pulse and Ionity Plus chargers across the UK, and loads of chargers in Europe as well. So let's talk about some of the controls in this car. You've got that wide, expansive LCD display in front of you, half of which, or slightly less than half, is the instrument panel behind the steering wheel, and maybe about 60% of it is a really wide sat nav and media display. Now you can control that with touch. There's also some controls here in the central console. You also get this hexagonal steering wheel. It's a slightly odd shaped hexagon. Apparently this is a new steering wheel for BMW. It's certainly not the same one as the i4. The controls are in the same place, but they look different. You've got the cruise control on the left and the media controls on the right, but the buttons aren't exactly the same. You also have individual stalks for windscreen wipers on the right and indicators on the left, and then there's the lights on the bottom right. So the controls of this car are a little bit different to the i4. Instead of having a kind of quasi gear stick, you have a kind of rocker to select between drive, reverse and neutral, and then you pull it down further for B mode. And the car we're driving here is the xDrive 40, which is rear wheel drive only, and only had 326 horsepower. Now that sounds like I'm really doing this car down. That's because the xDrive 50 has 523 horsepower and four-wheel drive. This car is no slouch though. It still only takes 6.1 seconds to hit 62 miles an hour. That's about as fast as the Ford Mustang Mach-E extended range version. So this car does have a fairly low centre of gravity for such a tall SUV, but it's still an SUV. If you want driving thrills, you should really go for the i4. The xDrive 50, with that extra power, goes from 0 to 62 in 4.6 seconds. So that is pretty good. That puts it on a par with things like the Jaguar I-Pace, the Volvo XC40. Now with that range of 380 miles, the xDrive 50 is way ahead of those other cars. So it's an all singing, all dancing, it's fast, and it's got the range. Dynamically, this car is very smooth. It goes around corners very well. However, the 40 only has steel suspension. The xDrive 50 has air suspension. Probably part of the reason for that is that this car is a little bit lighter. It's 2.3 tons, whereas the 50 is getting on for 2.5 tons. So in other words, it really needs all the help it can get to keep it from bouncing around too much. So neither versions of the iX are particularly slow. In fact, after driving this 40 version for a while, this is probably about as fast as you really want for an SUV. So it is a bit of a shame that this version, the 40, only comes with a smaller battery pack and not quite such good range. So driving about town as we are here, it is a big car, which means you have to be quite careful in the narrowness of the streets, but the smoothness of the power delivery and the nice easy steering means that it's still pretty decent. So if you're living in Chelsea and you wanted to drive an SUV that you have no intention of going anywhere near the country in, probably not such a bad choice.
Congratulations, I'm happy for you.
The car is full of tech, and for some reason it just told me it was happy for me. Not quite sure why, but I'm happy for me too, because I'm driving a brand new BMW. Now talking about that tech, this car comes with a HUD. It's slightly different in the way it operates to the one that's in the i4. The way it presents navigational information is larger, although it still does have that map view occasionally. There is a decent amount of safety tech as standard on these cars. These are very high spec cars. Unlike the i4, there kind of isn't a low spec version. Both the 40 and the 50 have particularly high spec right from the word go. There's things like lane departure warning. If you've got somebody in your blind spot, there's an orange triangle on the wing mirror just to warn you. So these cars are very well equipped. But there is a drawback with the iX compared to the i4. It's really expensive. Even this 40 version costs £70,000, and the 50 version starts at £94,000. So while this car feels like it should be a competitor to the Tesla Model Y, it's actually more of a Model X competitor. So the basic 40 at £70,000 is quite a lot cheaper than a Model X. That said, it doesn't have the boot space, doesn't have the option for having 6 or 7 seats either. The performance of the 50 does make it a decent competitor for the long-range version of the Model X. It also does very well against cars like the Audi e-tron. So the 50 is the more interesting car than the one that we're driving here today. Unfortunately, that £94,000 price tag does mean that it's very much a luxury car for very, very rich families. So overall, is the iX any good? Well, we have to say BMW hasn't done a bad job here. So you're going to buy this car probably because you like BMWs, you like the concept of BMWs. Yes, the interior is a bit different. It's a bit more high tech. It's not as raw and futuristic as the i3's interior, which in some respects is feeling a little bit dated now. There's a tasteful use of materials. We quite like this kind of weird suede stuff on the dashboard, kind of like jeans. It's also over here on the doors. This system for adjusting your seat is quite similar to ones that Mercedes have. It's nice and graphical. You know exactly what you're doing to your seat, although there's no problems with having it down by the side of the seat. These seats are pretty comfortable. I'm enjoying my ride around a small town. So if you're looking for an electric SUV, this car is a bit like a game of two halves actually, because the 40 is maybe not so competitive. At £70,000, it's way more expensive than, for example, the Volvo XC40. Yes, it's a lot bigger car, but the performance is inferior and the range is only slightly better. If you're not absolutely wedded to the BMW brand, the Audi Q4 gives you a fair bit more for your money at the £70,000 mark. You could probably spec up a fully loaded Q4 e-tron 50 for the same money as this, with absolutely everything. The 50 version of this car is a bit of a different story because of that huge range. 380 miles and the performance means that for a family car, for a rich family that wants to go a very long distance, it has pretty much all the boxes ticked. Yes, if you want an SUV that will go that far, the Ford Mustang Mach-E extended range rear-wheel drive only does give you almost exactly the same range for quite a lot less money. However, it doesn't have the class and the equipment level of this car. So overall, another competitive electric vehicle from BMW. It's great to see that one of the early entries into the electric vehicle market with the i3 is now coming back and producing pure electric cars that can really show some capabilities. Just make sure you've got plenty of money if you want to buy one, because really the 50 is the one to go for. Thanks for watching, and if you've enjoyed this video, please don't forget to like, comment and subscribe to our YouTube channel. See you next time.